Nostalgia feels bittersweet because it is the mind's way of revisiting time without being able to touch it again. It brings back emotions that once felt alive in the present, but now exist only as echoes in memory. The past becomes a place we can see clearly in our minds, yet can never physically enter again. And that distance between memory and reality is where the sweetness and sadness quietly meet. When we think of earlier moments in life, the mind rarely presents them as they truly were in full complexity. Instead, it highlights the emotional peaks while softening the difficult or ordinary parts that surrounded them. This selective remembering creates a glowing version of the past that feels warmer than the present moment. But that glow also casts a shadow, because we know it cannot be fully lived again. Nostalgia becomes powerful because it does not just show us what happened, but how it felt to be there. It reconstructs emotional states that we may not have experienced in years, bringing them back unexpectedly. A single memory can carry laughter, comfort, excitement, and longing all at once in a wave. And that emotional overload is what makes nostalgia feel both beautiful and slightly painful. Part of its bittersweet nature comes from the awareness that time has moved forward without permission. We do not get to pause moments we love or preserve them in their original form. Everything continues changing, even when we wish certain experiences could remain unchanged forever. Nostalgia reminds us gently that permanence is something we can feel but never truly hold. Even places tied to memories begin to feel different when we return to them later in life. The physical space may remain similar, but the emotional meaning we attach to it has shifted. We bring new versions of ourselves into old environments, and that changes how we experience them. So the place stays the same, but our relationship with it quietly transforms over time. The people connected to our memories also contribute to the bittersweet feeling of nostalgia. Some remain in our lives in different forms, while others exist only in memory now. Even when relationships continue, they rarely stay identical to how they once were in earlier phases. This shift creates a soft ache because we remember how things felt before change entered them. Nostalgia often appears during moments of silence, when the present feels still or reflective. In those moments, the mind naturally drifts toward periods that once felt more emotionally vivid. It searches for familiarity, especially when current experiences feel uncertain or unfamiliar. And in that search, it finds fragments of the past that feel both comforting and distant. Another reason nostalgia feels bittersweet is because it reveals how much we have changed internally. We are not the same observers who once lived through those moments we now remember. Our thoughts, priorities, and emotional responses evolve continuously over time, without us fully noticing. So when we revisit memories, we also meet earlier versions of ourselves we can never return to. That meeting between past and present selves creates a quiet, emotional tension inside nostalgia. We can appreciate who we were, while also recognizing how much growth has taken place since then. This dual awareness brings both pride and a gentle sense of loss at the same time. It is not sadness alone, but a layered feeling shaped by time and experience. Music is one of the strongest triggers of nostalgia because it bypasses logic and goes directly to emotion. A single familiar sound can instantly reopen mental spaces we thought were long closed. We do not just remember the song itself, but the period of life attached to it. And suddenly, we are emotionally transported into a version of ourselves from another time. Smells and small sensory details work in a similar way, often without warning or preparation. They activate memory in a way that feels almost involuntary, as if the past is calling back. These triggers remind us that memory is not just mental, but deeply connected to sensation. And that connection makes nostalgia feel immediate and intensely real. The bittersweet feeling also comes from knowing that even joyful moments were temporary. At the time, we may not have realized how fleeting those experiences truly were. Only later do we assign value to them through the lens of distance and absence. That realization turns simple memories into emotionally weighted reflections. Nostalgia often intensifies when life feels fast, uncertain, or emotionally overwhelming in the present. In such moments, the mind naturally seeks stability in remembered experiences that feel safer. The past becomes a mental refuge, even if it was not perfect in reality. And that refuge carries both comfort and the sadness of knowing it is unreachable. We also tend to idealize earlier times because memory softens sharp edges over repetition. Difficult conversations fade faster than moments of joy or connection in our recollection. This creates an emotional imbalance, where the past appears more harmonious than it actually was. And realizing this imbalance adds another layer of complexity to nostalgic emotion. Nostalgia is deeply tied to identity because it reflects who we once believed ourselves to be. We remember ambitions, friendships, and versions of life that shaped our early understanding of the world. Even if those versions no longer define us, they still exist within our emotional history. So remembering them feels like reconnecting with a former self we still recognize. There is also a subtle longing in nostalgia that does not always aim to return physically. Sometimes we do not want to go back to the exact moment, but to the feeling it gave us. It is the emotional atmosphere we miss more than the specific details of events. That is why nostalgia can feel both satisfying and incomplete at the same time. Shared nostalgia creates connection between people who experienced similar periods of life together. When memories are discussed, they become shared emotional spaces that reinforce bonds. However, even shared memories are experienced differently by each individual involved. This difference adds depth to nostalgia, showing how perception shapes emotional truth. As time passes, nostalgia can grow stronger because distance increases emotional interpretation. Events that once felt ordinary become meaningful when viewed through the lens of years. The mind assigns value not only to what happened, but to what it meant in hindsight. And meaning often deepens as time separates us from the original experience. There is also a paradox within nostalgia that makes it emotionally complex and layered. We miss the past, yet we understand that returning would not recreate the same conditions. Even if we could go back, we would bring new awareness that would change everything. So the desire to return exists alongside the understanding that true return is impossible. Nostalgia teaches us indirectly about impermanence without using direct explanation or instruction. It shows us that all experiences, no matter how meaningful, exist within time's movement. Nothing remains frozen, even the moments we wish could stay unchanged forever. And that realization shapes the bittersweet tone that defines nostalgic reflection. At its core, nostalgia is emotional memory, layered with awareness of loss and change. It allows us to feel gratitude for what was, while also acknowledging that it is gone. This duality is what gives nostalgia its depth and emotional resonance across human experience. And it is why it remains one of the most universally understood feelings. Even when nostalgia hurts slightly, it is not something people avoid completely. There is comfort in revisiting who we were and what shaped our emotional history. It helps us understand continuity in our lives, even through constant change. And that understanding gives nostalgia its quiet but lasting significance. In many ways, nostalgia is proof that experiences do not disappear completely after they end. They remain within us as emotional impressions that can be revisited through memory. Even if time moves forward, those impressions continue to influence how we feel. So the past stays alive in a different form, even when it is no longer present. The bittersweet nature of nostalgia ultimately comes from this coexistence of presence and absence. We feel something vividly while knowing it belongs to another point in time. We experience joy and loss simultaneously within the same emotional moment. And that combination is what makes nostalgia one of the most deeply human experiences.